Have you ever wondered if the world around you is truly real, or if it's a carefully constructed illusion meant to keep you asleep? What if everything you see, touch, and believe to be solid is nothing more than a dream woven by invisible forces, ancient entities that feed on your attention, your fear, and your faith? Since the dawn of time, humanity has been told that this world is divine creation. But the Gnostics whispered a far more disturbing truth, that we are prisoners inside a dream built by the Archons, cosmic manipulators that mimic divinity, yet are far from divine. Why did they create this dream? Why do we keep reincarnating into a system of suffering, desire, and forgetfulness? And most importantly, how can we awaken from it? Across ancient manuscripts buried for centuries and recovered only recently, the Gnostics left clues, symbols, stories, and coded warnings, revealing that our reality is not what it seems. They spoke of a spiritual amnesia imposed upon humanity, of a false light that blinds rather than enlightens, and of a hidden path that leads the awakened soul back to the source beyond the illusion. In this video, we will uncover what the Archons truly are, how they shape your dreams, and what it means when Gnostic teachers said, "The world you call real is the greatest deception of all." But before we go deeper into this forbidden wisdom, take a moment to join our circle of seekers, subscribe, and stay with us on this journey through the ancient knowledge that was once forbidden, hidden, and burned, because only those who dare to question the dream can truly awaken. Long before organized religion claimed to explain creation, the ancient Gnostics told a very different story, one that began not with divine perfection, but with a tragic mistake. According to the Gnostic texts found in Nag Hammadi in Egypt, the universe as we know it was not the flawless design of an all-good God, but the byproduct of a flawed emanation, a shadow that fell from the realm of pure light. In this vision, the true source, the unknowable and infinite spirit, called the monad, is beyond all comprehension, dwelling in silence and fullness. But from this eternal stillness emanated beings of light known as eons, each representing divine aspects such as wisdom, truth, and light itself. Among them was Sophia, the embodiment of divine wisdom. Moved by a desire to know the unknowable, she acted outside the harmony of the pleroma, the spiritual fullness, and from her unbalanced yearning emerged a distorted creation. From her fall was born Yaldabaoth, the false god, the demiurge, a being of immense power but limited awareness. Believing himself to be the only creator, he proclaimed, "I am God, and there is none beside me." Yet he was blind to the greater light above him. Out of his ignorance and arrogance, he formed the material universe, our world, and populated it with his servants, the Archons, rulers of this dreamlike realm. The Gnostics saw these Archons as the cosmic architects of illusion, not mere demons, but spiritual forces that bind the soul to matter. They are the governors of time, desire, and decay, the mechanisms that make you forget who you are. Their power lies not in visible chains, but in suggestion, distraction, and distortion. To the senses, they weave a tapestry so convincing that the soul begins to believe the illusion is real. And once you believe in it, you begin to serve it. Think for a moment. Every day, you wake up inside a pattern of repetition, work, worry, desire, exhaustion. You are born, you strive, you suffer, and you die. Then it begins again. The Gnostics taught that this endless loop is not natural. It is the dream trap, a system designed to harvest spiritual energy from the unaware. The Archons sustain their false creation through human attention and emotion, keeping souls asleep inside cycles of ignorance and fear. Some scholars have compared this vision to modern concepts like the simulation theory or even the metaphor of the Matrix. But for the ancient mystics, it wasn't science fiction, it was spiritual warfare. They believed that when humanity collectively forgot its divine origin, the world became a prison of dreams. Everything we perceive as real, our societies, our desires, our religions, serves to reinforce the illusion of separateness. The Archons whisper in thoughts, manipulate through institutions, and sustain systems of control that make us forget our divine spark. But what makes their deception so powerful is that it feels real. Pain feels real. Hunger feels real. Love feels real. That is the essence of the dream trap. It is a perfect imitation of divine creation, a mirror of heaven made of shadow and dust. The Gnostic texts call it the kinema, the realm of emptiness. In this place, light is trapped inside matter, and the soul must learn to see through appearances to remember where it came from. The Church Fathers, threatened by these ideas, condemned the Gnostics as heretics. They feared the dangerous possibility that people might stop worshiping the material God and start seeking the inner one, the hidden source beyond all form. As centuries passed, these teachings were buried, burned, or rewritten. The names of Sophia and Yaldabaoth faded from sacred texts, replaced by simpler stories of sin and redemption. Yet fragments survived enough for us to see that what the Gnostics were describing was not rebellion against God, but rebellion against the counterfeit God who usurped creation. So when you look around and wonder why suffering never ends, why humanity seems trapped in endless cycles of greed and conflict, the Gnostics would tell you, you are witnessing the dream trap at work. The Archons do not need to enslave you by force. They only need you to believe that what you see is all there is. And yet, in the depths of this illusion, the Gnostics claimed there remains a spark of the true light, a fragment of the divine Sophia herself, hidden within every human soul. This spark remembers. It is the part of you that feels homesick for something you cannot name. It senses you do not belong entirely to this world. It is the whisper in your heart when you look at the stars and feel that you have been here before. In the next part of this revelation, we will uncover how the Archons maintain their power through human thought and emotion, and why awakening your divine memory is the first act of liberation. If the Archons are the invisible architects of illusion, then their most powerful tool is not a weapon made of matter, but the mind itself. According to the Gnostic vision, the true battlefield of this world is consciousness. The Archons cannot create genuine life. They can only imitate it. They cannot generate divine light. They can only bend and reflect it through mirrors of illusion. And so, to sustain their false world, they learn to manipulate the fabric of human thought and emotion, crafting an invisible net of control that most souls never even suspect exists. The Gnostic text described the Archons as forces of imitation, counterfeit spirits that echo divine creation without the spark of truth. They weave illusions through perception-planting images, desires, and fears within the psyche. Their control does not come from visible chains, but from programming. They implant patterns of thought that keep humanity oscillating between hope and despair, between longing and loss. This is why, according to Gnostic teachers, the greatest prison has no walls. It exists inside the mind that believes it is free. Fear is their first weapon. Fear keeps the mind in survival mode, trapped in constant reaction, unable to reach silence or awareness. The Archons feed from collective fear like parasites on spiritual energy. Wars, catastrophes, and endless conflicts are not random. They are manifestations of this invisible feeding. Every time humanity becomes divided through politics, ideology, or belief, the Archons tighten their grip. They transform thought into turbulence, emotion into confusion, and confusion into forgetfulness. When the mind is drowning in fear, it cannot hear the quiet voice of the divine spark within. Desire is their second weapon. Desire seduces the soul into chasing shadows, wealth, beauty, validation, power. The Archons do not need you to renounce the spiritual path. They simply need you to be distracted from it. They present infinite reflections of fulfillment, each more dazzling than the last, but all of them hollow. The Gnostics said the Archons constructed the world as a labyrinth of cravings. Every satisfaction is temporary. Every possession fades, and the hunger returns. In this cycle, the soul remains asleep, mistaking the pursuit of pleasure for the search for light. And then comes deception, the subtlest weapon of all. The Archons corrupt symbols, teachings, and even religions, transforming sacred truths into dogmas that lead away from liberation. They take words like God, salvation, or heaven and distort their meaning. They make you worship the outer image while ignoring the inner presence. They replace inner knowing with blind faith, gnosis with obedience. Through this inversion, they maintain the illusion that the light is outside you, that truth must be given by others, that you are too small, too sinful, too unworthy to reach the source yourself. Some Gnostic texts even suggested that the Archons interfere in dreams, the true dreams of the soul that occur beyond the physical world. In those dreams, the soul remembers its divine home, but when the Archons sense it awakening, they intrude, twisting visions into nightmares, fears, or illusions of grandeur. They turn revelation into confusion, so that even the seeker doubts what they've seen. That is why the ancients said, "Beware of the counterfeit light. Not all that shines comes from the source." The mechanism of control continues through time and collective belief. The Archons rule not as visible kings, but as patterns woven into systems governments, media, religions, even technologies that shape perception. Some modern thinkers have compared this to the algorithmic hypnosis of our age. Endless screens, infinite noise, constant comparison, fear of missing out. The Gnostics would have recognized it instantly. To them, it is the same ancient illusion wearing new clothes, a digital extension of the dream trap. But the Gnostic path was not one of despair. It was a path of awakening. They taught that recognizing the illusion is the first step toward liberation. Once you see the mechanism, it loses power. Once you name the Archon, it begins to dissolve. Awareness becomes the sword that cuts through the net. For every emotion that the Archons try to manipulate, there is an equal force of divine remembrance within you. Fear can be transmuted into vigilance. Desire can become aspiration. Even suffering can become awakening if one understands its hidden purpose. The Gnostic sages often spoke of the silence beyond thought, a state of inner stillness where the voice of the true self can be heard again. In that silence, the Archons cannot reach you. Their control depends on movement on thought, noise, reaction. But when you enter the temple of silence, when you remember yourself as a fragment of the living light, their illusions begin to fade. It is as if the dream loses color, the noise loses meaning, and what remains is pure awareness, the spark of the pleroma that no illusion can contain. Imagine for a moment what would happen if humanity, even for an instant, stopped believing in the illusion. If billions of souls suddenly remembered their origin beyond matter, the Archons' empire would crumble overnight. Their world, built from borrowed light and collective belief, would vanish like mist under the rising sun. This is why, according to the ancient texts, awakening is considered an act of rebellion, not against God, but against the counterfeit powers that mimic him. And yet, this rebellion is not violent. It is gentle, inner, silent. The Archons thrive on resistance and fear, but they wither before understanding. The true warrior of Gnosis fights with clarity, not with anger. The one who awakens does not destroy the dream, but sees through it, and by seeing, becomes free. In the next part of this revelation, we will uncover how this illusion was maintained through centuries of organized systems, how temples, empires, and even sacred books were shaped to keep the dream alive, and what traces of the Archons can still be found in our modern world. When the Gnostics spoke of the Archons, they did not describe horned demons lurking in darkness. They spoke of rulers, beings of authority, both cosmic and earthly, who govern through order, law, and imitation of the divine. The very word Archon in Greek means authority or ruler, and in the Gnostic view, the world system itself, its empires, hierarchies, religions, and institutions were extensions of that authority. The Archons did not need to enslave humanity by chains. They only needed to convince people that their chains were holy. To understand how this control took form, we must return to the ancient world, when the spiritual knowledge of Gnosis spread quietly among the seekers of Alexandria, Antioch, and Jerusalem. In hidden schools and desert monasteries, initiates whispered the same dangerous idea, that the divine spark within each person is greater than any god outside them. This teaching was revolutionary. It threatened the structure of power that depended on intermediaries, the priests, the kings, the temples that claimed to stand between humanity and heaven. For if every soul could reach the source directly, the entire hierarchy would collapse. The Archons, in the Gnostic understanding, worked through these hierarchies. They whispered through systems that mimicked the light but served the illusion. They inspired laws that demanded obedience instead of awareness, rituals that repeated endlessly but never awakened the heart. They transformed sacred mysteries into ceremonies of submission. The very temples that were meant to open the path to the divine became fortresses guarding the gates of heaven. Consider how the earliest myths were rewritten. In older traditions, the feminine aspect of divinity, the Sophia, the Shekinah, the Mother, was venerated as the living bridge between the human and the eternal. But in the Archonic world, she was silenced. The divine feminine became demonized, suppressed, and erased. Wisdom was turned into sin, and curiosity into rebellion. Eve, once the symbol of awakening, was recast as the cause of downfall. The serpent, once the bringer of knowledge, became the embodiment of evil. The message was clear: do not seek knowledge, do not question, obey. This inversion was not accidental. It was the perfect Archonic logic, transforming enlightenment into guilt. As the centuries passed, empires grew around these distorted ideas. The Roman Empire, the Byzantine Empire, and later, the religious kingdoms of Europe all built their power upon divine legitimacy. Kings ruled by the grace of God, priests interpreted divine will, and the people were told to accept suffering as sacred duty. This alignment of power and faith created a vast spiritual machinery that mirrored the cosmic one described by the Gnostics, a hierarchy where light was filtered, distorted, and rationed to the masses. The truth was hidden behind layers of dogma, and anyone who dared to see beyond it was branded heretic. When the early Gnostics were hunted, their texts were burned and their names erased. The Church Fathers condemned them fiercely, calling their revelations dangerous fantasies. But why? Because Gnosticism taught inner freedom that no empire could tax, no priest could mediate, and no ruler could control. The Archons, through these systems, sought to replace inner revelation with outer authority. They knew that a humanity guided by inner gnosis would no longer serve the illusion. So they created substitutes, elaborate rituals, institutions, and doctrines that imitated spirituality while hiding the living spirit itself. Even the symbol of the cross, so ancient, predating Christianity by millennia, was transformed. To the Gnostics, it once represented the intersection of spirit and matter, the descent of divine light into the material world. But the Archonic world turned it into a symbol of suffering and guilt, replacing transcendence with obedience. Salvation became external, conditional, and controlled. The seeker was told that only through the institution could grace be found, not through personal revelation. Thus, the dream deepened. Some scholars today see in this pattern not conspiracy, but psychology. They argue that every age transforms spiritual truth into social order, and that control arises naturally from fear. But the Gnostic texts insist this fear is not human. It is the echo of Archonic influence. Every time an empire rises claiming divine sanction, every time knowledge is forbidden, every time fear replaces freedom, the Archons are at work. Their essence is imitation. Their kingdom is bureaucracy cosmic and earthly. And yet, the Gnostics also believed that even within corrupted systems, the divine spark continues to burn. Throughout history, mystics and visionaries, many within the very religions that sought to silence them, carried the hidden flame. The Sufis, the Hermeticists, the Kabbalists, the Cathars, even early Christian mystics like Meister Eckhart and Hildegard of Bingen spoke of a direct experience of God beyond form, beyond dogma. They rediscovered the gnosis in their own tongues and ages, proving that the light cannot be extinguished, only hidden. But in the modern age, the Archons adapted once again. Their temples became screens, their sermons became algorithms, their altars became markets. The illusion no longer demands faith, it demands attention. Every thought, every emotion, every desire is monetized, categorized, and recycled to keep the human mind dreaming. The Archons have no need to burn books anymore. They simply flood the world with noise until truth is drowned in the chaos of data. Humanity has become the priesthood of its own captivity, worshipping the images it creates. Still, deep beneath the surface, something ancient stirs. The same longing that once drove Sophia to create the world now drives humanity to awaken from it. The dream begins to tremble when even one person remembers. The Archons, for all their mimicry, cannot touch the essence of the divine spark. And that spark, once ignited, spreads from soul to soul like invisible fire. In the next revelation, we will uncover what the Gnostics truly meant by awakening from the dream, how consciousness can pierce through the illusion, remember its origin, and reclaim the light that was stolen. This is where the hidden warning becomes the hidden key. The Gnostics said that no gate built by the Archons can hold a soul that remembers. For them, awakening was not an abstract enlightenment, but a process of inner rebellion, a quiet revolution that begins when the seeker stops believing that the dream is all there is. They called this process anamnesis, the divine recollection, remembering what the soul once knew before it fell into flesh and forgetfulness. And this memory, once stirred, burns through illusion like sunlight through fog. Awakening, in the Gnostic sense, does not happen in temples or ceremonies. It begins in the hidden room of the heart, when a person feels an inexplicable nostalgia for something beyond time, a home they cannot name. The Archons fear this longing because it is the first crack in their machinery. While fear and desire keep the mind spinning, longing points upward, back toward the pleroma. So the Gnostic path starts by listening to that longing instead of silencing it. They taught that within every person lives a double awareness, one bound to matter and emotion, and another that watches silently, untouched. The first belongs to the dream trap. The second belongs to the light. To awaken the higher awareness, seekers practice discernment, the art of distinguishing what comes from the spirit and what comes from the imitation. Every thought, emotion, or impulse was to be observed and tested. Does this arise from love and freedom, or from fear and control? If from fear, it is archonic. If from freedom, it is divine. Through this inner vigilance, the disciple slowly learned to separate truth from illusion, light from reflection. It was not about renouncing the world, but about seeing through it. The Gnostic Jesus of the Gospel of Thomas said, "When you make the two one, the inner as the outer and the outer as the inner, then you will enter the kingdom." In other words, when perception ceases to be divided, the dream loses its power. The early initiates also practiced silence. They knew that words and thoughts are the texture of the dream. Silence breaks its continuity. In the stillness between breaths, the counterfeit voice cannot speak. There the seeker begins to sense another rhythm, a pulse older than the universe. This practice of interior stillness was called hesychia by later mystics, but its roots lie in the same Gnostic soil. It is through silence that Sophia's whisper can be heard again, the memory of the true light calling the fragment back to wholeness. The next step was inner knowledge through symbols. The Gnostics encoded truths in myth, not to confuse, but to protect them. They knew that the mind enslaved by the Archons could only understand through stories. So they told the tale of the soul's descent into matter, of Sophia's fall and redemption, of the Christ light entering the world to awaken sleeping sparks. These were not history lessons, they were maps for the soul. Each myth described a stage of awakening, recognizing the prison, confronting the gatekeepers, remembering the origin, and returning to the source. When the seeker recognized themselves in the myth, they activated the memory it carried. This is why the Gnostic texts often sound like riddles. They are designed to awaken, not to explain, but awakening was never without confrontation. The Archons dwell not only in the heavens, They echo within us. Every fear, pride, and attachment is their reflection. To escape the dream trap, the seeker must face these inner archons, the voices that say you are unworthy, you are alone, you will fail. The Gnostics taught that these forces appear during the soul's ascent after death as well, each archon demanding the password of truth before letting the soul pass. Those passwords were not magic words, but states of consciousness. Only a soul that has known itself cannot be deceived. Thus, every inner battle in life prepares the soul for the great passage beyond death. This process of purification, of shedding false identities, was often described as dying before you die. To awaken is to experience a symbolic death, the collapse of the dream ego. The Gospel of Philip says, "Those who say they will die first and then rise are mistaken. If they do not first receive the resurrection while they live, they will not receive it when they die." In modern terms, this means awakening now, not later. It is realizing that you are consciousness watching the world, not the dream character trapped inside it. When that realization stabilizes, the Archons lose their claim. Their power depends on your identification with the mask. When the mask falls, the actor is free. For many Gnostics, the guide of this journey was the Christos, not a single historical figure, but the universal Logos, the divine intelligence that descends to awaken the sparks. Christ was the antidote to the Archons, the living remembrance of the source. To know Christ meant to awaken that Logos within oneself. Hence the phrase Christ within you, the hope of glory. The Savior was never meant to be external. Salvation was the awakening of inner light. This is what terrified the rulers of both heaven and earth. When the seeker reached the stage of illumination, they no longer saw the world as a trap, but as a classroom. Even the Archons became teachers, revealing by contrast what is real. Their deception served as the mirror through which truth recognized itself. The awakened one could live in the same world, but no longer belong to it. They walked through illusion like a lucid dreamer, inside sleep-aware, compassionate, and free. Gnostics called such beings living ones, and their presence was said to weaken the archonic field wherever they walked. Awakening, therefore, was not only personal, it was contagious. Each enlightened soul became a lighthouse, piercing the fog of the collective dream. Imagine the implications if more people began to live this way today, no longer hypnotized by fear or desire, no longer worshiping symbols of power, but quietly remembering. The machinery of illusion would tremble, not through violence, but through the still force of awareness. For the Archons cannot imprison what has awakened to its infinite nature. They can only manipulate those who forget. This was the essence of every Gnostic warning. The only real sin is forgetfulness. In the next revelation, we will explore what happens when awakening spreads, how collective remembrance threatens the Archon's dominion, and why, throughout history, every genuine movement of spiritual awakening has faced suppression, distortion, or disappearance. Because the moment many awaken within the dream itself begins to dissolve. The Gnostics warned that whenever the divine spark begins to stir collectively, the Archons respond. They do not appear as monsters or shadowy figures. They move through systems, ideologies, and even good intentions. Their goal is simple: to keep the human mind asleep. They understand that one awakened soul weakens the net, but 1,000 could tear it apart entirely. And so, through the centuries, they have worked tirelessly to neutralize every movement of true remembrance, replacing liberation with imitation, living gnosis with lifeless doctrine. In the ancient world, their first strategy was suppression through fear. When early seekers began to rediscover their divine nature, the Archons whispered through institutions of power. Heresy became a crime. Books were burned. Teachers were silenced. The seekers who spoke of light within were accused of darkness without. From Alexandria to the deserts of Syria, sacred texts were buried to survive the purge. The Nag Hammadi Library, discovered in 1945, was one such remnant, hidden in clay jars by monks who feared annihilation. The Archons succeeded for a time. The world forgot. Humanity entered the long night of spiritual amnesia that we now call the Dark Ages. Yet even in darkness, light persisted. Mystical orders, secret schools, and wandering hermits carried fragments of the Gnosis in whispers and symbols. When the Cathars of medieval France rose centuries later, preaching that the true God was of light and love, and that the material world was the work of a false creator, the Archonic system reacted with fury. Crusades were launched, entire cities erased, and fire became the instrument of forgetfulness once more. The pattern was always the same. When truth emerged, imitation followed. When the flame was lit, shadow swelled to smother it. As civilization advanced, the tools of suppression changed shape. The Archons no longer needed swords. They used ideas. They learned to distort revelation from within. Every time a teacher arose speaking of unity, compassion, or divine memory, their words were twisted into hierarchies and systems of control. The Buddha became religion, Jesus became empire, Hermes became dogma. Each messenger of freedom was rebranded as a figure to be worshipped rather than emulated. The path of inner discovery was replaced with rituals of external devotion. Humanity was taught to kneel before its own reflection, the most perfect archonic trick of all. In modern times, the strategy evolved yet again. The Archons adapted to a world of reason and science. They no longer needed priests. They had algorithms. Their cathedrals became networks of distraction. The new commandment is not believe, but consume. The dream trap expanded into every screen, every advertisement, every endless scroll that keeps the human gaze turned outward. Information became noise, knowledge became data, and wisdom was drowned in a sea of stimulation. The Archon's new sacrament is attention, and humanity offers it willingly, hour by hour, heartbeat by heartbeat. Think about the structure of modern life. You wake up, reach for your device, and the dream begins before your eyes are even fully open. You scroll through fear, desire, envy, and outrage, the same ancient forces, now digital. The Archons have no need to hide in cathedrals when they can live in circuits. Their control is elegant, invisible, normalized, disguised as connection. You believe you are informed, but you are being programmed. You believe you are choosing, but your desires are designed. The illusion has simply changed form, but its essence remains the same, distraction that feeds forgetfulness. But the Gnostics also foresaw something the Archons could never prevent, that each cycle of control eventually awakens resistance. Every system of oppression plants the seed of its own unraveling. In every age, people begin to feel the emptiness beneath the noise. They turn inward, seeking silence again. That silence, the same ancient stillness where the divine spark whispers, is the Archon's greatest enemy. They cannot penetrate it. In that moment of interior peace, their entire empire of noise collapses. History itself can be read as a repeating pattern of this struggle: revelation, distortion, awakening, suppression, and rebirth. But in our era, something new is happening. The network built to enslave consciousness has begun to connect it. Through the same technology once used for distraction, seekers find each other, share ancient texts, exchange insights once forbidden. The Archons, in their arrogance, have built the very web through which their illusion is unraveling. Humanity's collective memory is reassembling itself, one spark at a time. Yet the danger remains. The Archons will always attempt to counterfeit awakening. They will offer false enlightenment, easy, profitable, harmless. They will turn spirituality into entertainment, self-knowledge into branding, and rebellion into fashion. They will whisper, "You are already awake. You need do nothing." That is their subtlest trap, convincing the seeker that awakening is a feeling rather than a transformation. The true awakening is not comfortable. It is a death and a birth. It dismantles every false certainty and reveals the divine mirror within. The Gnostics would say the great test of our time is not external conflict, but inner clarity. Can we discern the true light from the counterfeit? Can we feel the vibration of authenticity beneath the noise? The Archons' empire ends the moment enough souls answer yes. Because awareness spreads faster than illusion, it is the only contagion they cannot contain. Once a person truly remembers, their very presence becomes disruptive to the system. They no longer react with fear or desire. They no longer give energy to the dream. They walk among the sleeping as living reminders of another reality. So, the war against awakening continues, but its outcome is already written in the nature of light itself. Darkness can only imitate. It cannot create. Its power ends where remembrance begins. And this is why the Gnostics left their warning not in despair, but in hope, that the dream, no matter how deep, is not eternal. It will unravel from within, through the quiet awakening of those who dare to remember. In the next revelation, we will explore what happens after remembrance, how awakening changes perception, dissolves fear, and transforms human destiny. We will see how the Gnostics envisioned the liberated soul, not escaping the world, but redeeming it from within, turning illusion itself into a doorway back to the source. To the Gnostics, awakening was never about escaping the world. It was about seeing it rightly. Once the veil falls, the same streets, the same faces, the same sky remain, but everything feels different. The world no longer appears solid and absolute. It becomes translucent, like a dream whose symbols you finally understand. Every moment becomes a mirror, every event a teaching, every being a reflection of the source you had forgotten. The liberated soul realizes that the dream trap was not only a prison, but also a teacher, a crucible in which awareness learns to recognize itself. The awakened person no longer fights the Archons as enemies. They dissolve them as illusions. The Archons live through reaction, through identification with thought and emotion. But when you observe without attachment, when you feel anger without becoming it, pain without losing yourself in it, the Archons lose substance. They feed on unconsciousness, and awareness starves them. That is why the greatest act of rebellion is stillness. Silence is the unspoken name of freedom. The Gnostic masters described the liberated one as a stranger in the world. They live among others, but not under the same spell. They participate in life's duties and joys, but without forgetting who they are. Their compassion grows because they see that even those who harm are sleepwalking souls caught in the same web. To awaken is not to separate, but to understand, to love without illusion. The awakened one sees that the dream is collapsing not through destruction, but through revelation. In this state, every symbol regains its true meaning. The serpent is no longer evil, but wisdom. The fall becomes the descent of light into experience. The cross becomes the intersection where matter and spirit meet again in harmony. The soul that was once trapped now walks freely through the dream, turning darkness into a tool of awakening for others. This, the Gnostics said, was the highest mystery, to bring light into the illusion until the illusion itself shines. And here lies the secret most feared by the Archons, that redemption is not the destruction of the world, but its transfiguration. When enough souls remember, the dream itself becomes luminous. The false creation turns into a bridge back to the true one. This is the meaning of the final awakening, not escape, but integration. In the next and final block, we'll close this revelation, summarizing the message of the Gnostics, reminding you of the eternal call to awaken, and inviting you to join the community of seekers who keep this forbidden light alive. Now you understand the hidden warning the Gnostics left behind. The world you call real is not evil in itself. It is a dream within the mind of the divine, hijacked by forces that forgot their origin. The Archons are not external monsters. They are reflections of forgetfulness, both cosmic and personal. Every time you choose fear over awareness, distraction over silence, or control over freedom, they rise again. And every time you remember the still light inside you, they vanish like smoke. The Gnostics said salvation is not a gift to be granted, but a memory to be recovered. You are never truly separated from the source, only asleep within its infinite dream. The true awakening happens when you realize that the same divine spark that once moved through Sophia that built stars and souls alike also beats quietly in your own chest. That spark is what the Archons could never steal. It is the reason why, despite centuries of distortion and control, the longing for truth never died. It is why you are listening to these words right now. So ask yourself, what if your entire life, your joys, your sorrows, your questions, has been the journey of that spark trying to remember itself? What if every moment of doubt, every longing for something beyond, was the whisper of the eternal calling you home? The Gnostics believed that when the last soul remembers, creation itself will awaken, and the dream will end, not in destruction, but in illumination. This is why their message still matters, because the story is not finished. The Archons still whisper through the systems of the world, and the seekers still walk quietly among them, lighting small flames of remembrance. Each time you question, reflect, and turn inward, you become one of them. You keep alive the lineage of Forbidden's light that began thousands of years ago. If these words resonated with something deep within you, something older than memory, then you already know you are part of this awakening. Join the circle of seekers. Subscribe, comment, and share this revelation so that others can find the same forgotten spark within themselves, not as followers, but as fellow travelers on the same hidden path. Because the dream is ending, not through fear or fire, but through remembrance. And perhaps the next awakening begins with you.